Chapter 81. Invitation. Summary. It's time. Space pirate time. It's beginning! They're all eating dinner when it happens. Things are still a little subdued, even days after separating from the kids. But Izuku knows they'll get past this. They'll never stop missing Pyra and Fastel. No. But eventually they'll find a new sense of normal, like they always do. It's not like the kids are completely out of their lives. They chat at least once a hiatus cycle. For them, it's more like once or twice a day, given they're not on the same day-night cycle. Right now, they've actually turned off the lighting cycle to see what they naturally fall into. The original plan was to go back to a 24-hour cycle because, Earth? But after Dinky ranted about cave people and 48-hour cycles, even Izuku couldn't keep up with him. They just decided to give in and see what happened. Not that their patterns changed much in a few days, so dinner was at the same time it always was. Just as they were finishing up, Dinky and Mina seeing who could find the longest noodle and ending up making a mess. The control console flashed briefly, and an electric chime sounded. Izuku was just starting to be able to pick apart the slightly different sounds made for different alerts. Like, seriously, why were they so similar? Were there other notes being played that their ears couldn't pick up on? Or was it just so people not used to the ship didn't know what was going on? And that sound was the ping of an incoming message. Who was sending them a message in the middle of deep space? There weren't any planets nearby, so what could it be for? Izuku stood up before the others had a chance. I'll check it out. Don't need everyone's dinners to go cold. There were some thanks as he pushed away from the counter and made his way to the other end of the ship, which wasn't really saying much. He could still hear Katsuki scolding Dinky for dropping part of his dinner on the ground. Izuku leaned over the control console, looking at the hologram screen where the notification had popped up. Then he let out a startled gasp. Izuku rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things, but when he looked at the message again, he couldn't help but grin. "What's going on, Izu babe?" Mina asked, his surprise drawing the others' attention. "The guild! They finally reached out to us!" Izuku beamed, turning to see the others' surprised yet happy expressions. This is what they had been working towards all month, and it had finally come to fruition. "What did they say?" Ochako asked. Izuku chuckled. "I haven't read past the first line." He slipped into his pilot seat, focusing on the glowing text. They said they've heard word of us making a name for ourselves, and that, from what they've uncovered, we would fit well with their organization. They want to invite us to one of their central bases to assess us in person. But from what they've heard of our skills, it's more a formality at this point. Izuku jumped a little when he turned to see Mei right next to him. He hadn't even heard her move. His gremlin sibling was inspecting the message with her quirk-enhanced stare. She reached over him to poke at a few things, and some lines of code popped up next to the message. Mei whistles. "This is pretty heavily protected, almost impossible to intercept. It's got their digital signature I read about and everything. This is the real deal." Izuku nudged her out of his space before inputting the location at the end of the message into their navigation system. "It's just a few days away." "Sweet!" Denki cheered. "We're gonna be space pirates." "Government-sanctioned space pirates," Izuku reminded. "Don't spoil our fun," Ochako pouted. "What is with you and crimes?" Kachan scoffed. Ochako just smiled sharply. Despite the blonde's best efforts, Izuku saw him shudder slightly. "Whatever. Let's just do it right this time. We go in prepared, or we don't go in at all." Kachan was met with nods all around, and that was that. They were going to meet up with the Space Pirate Guild, and they were going to do it properly. When they arrived at the location, after days of travel and preparation, they were met with a large mechanical, floating structure nestled among an asteroid belt. The station itself was a hodgepodge of different textiles. Sleek, seamless metal transitioned into a mess of rusted-looking pipes and wires, into dark steel set with glowing veins of light. Every slice was distinct, but it all seemed harmoniously melded together, creating the massive space station in front of them. It was a little hard to see at first, resembling the way air would waver on a hot day, but the station was surrounded by an energy field. Whenever a stray chunk of space rock would float over to the barrier, the orange energy would buzz to life and deflect the debris safely away from the building. Izuku was once again glad that Mei was not the designated pilot, because he doesn't think anything would have stopped her from pressing her face as close to the glass as she could, enraptured by the near-invisible barrier. He could see her quirk working overtime, zooming in to try and find what in the hunk of mismatched metal was responsible for the field. But the barrier posed a little bit of a bump in the road. Sure, its main purpose seemed to be keeping unwanted things out, but what happens when they're inside? Would they be able to get out, or would they just be rebuffed like the debris? What if something went wrong? If things took the worst possible turn, how would this affect their escape? Izuku thinks it shouldn't be too hard to counter, but it would make things a little more complicated. The ship moved in slowly, Denki completely focused on easing them forward. Katsuki's gaze scanned for any threats from its spotted weapons, and Izuku was keeping watch of all the sensors and alerts on his side of the panel, ready for any sudden change. What Izuku saw instead was a message coming through. "They say they're going to open an entrance in the barrier for us," Izuku said. He turned in his seat to look at Kacchan. "Should we enter?" Kacchan looked thoughtful for a moment, eyes flicking towards the window. He turned back towards Izuku with a vicious, "We've come this far. Let's do this." Everyone turned their sights back to the barrier as a part of the wavering space flickered for a moment before falling away. Excitement swelled in Izuku's chest. They were finally meeting the guild. A hatch in the floating base slid open for their arrival, wide enough that even Denki could land on the metal floor with little problem. The hatch slid closed, sealing out the void of space, and Izuku watched the numbers on the air sensors level out to safe levels. He slipped out of his seat and approached the doors, hands wringing in nervous anticipation. Just as Kacchan was about to open the door, Denki called out, "Wait!" Kacchan yanked his hand back like the panel had burned him, and everyone stared at the electric blonde. Denki grimaced, seemingly not having meant to be so loud. "Sorry," he chuckled. "I realize we never talked about what level of branding we want to show off. Like, do we want to show up being all creepy and godlike, or do we just want to be our normal dumbass selves?" Izuku hummed. "I doubt they actually believe we're gods. They probably are masters of branding themselves and know what they're doing." "I think honesty is the best policy here," Ochako said. Mina smiled. "Let's just be ourselves. We're trying to build a good relationship here, so we don't want them to feel like we're putting up a front." "We also want them to take us seriously," Kacchan pointed out, crossing his arms. "Acting like fucking idiots won't help with that." "Don't let Denki talk. Got it," Mina chirped. "Just be smart with this," Katsuki scolded. "Don't break anything. Don't let the gremlin loose. Don't let them know we're from Terra. Don't let them know we're new to this whole space thing." Katsuki glared at Denki when saying that last bit. Denki chuckled nervously. "Got it." "We can do this, Kacchan," Izuku reassured. "We've got training for dealing with the media and all sorts of other stuff that we can fall back on. It's not like we're walking in blind." Kacchan nodded with a huff, seemingly accepting things. "Anything else before I open the door?" Katsuki questioned flatly. Izuku shook his head along with everyone else. Katsuki just sighed, pressing his hand to the panel. The final door slid open, and the air that rushed in was stale and cool, dissipating the fresh oxygen their plants had lovingly made for them. They really needed to get into the habit of closing the inner door. Katsuki stepped down first, eyes narrowed and looking around. When after a second he didn't say anything, Izuku hopped out next to him. The space was large, obviously made for housing much bigger ships than their own. His footsteps echoed off the high ceilings as he walked, peering around the ship to see the hangar still empty. "Echo!" Dinky shouted with a giggle. Katsuki immediately shot him a scathing glare. Dinky shrunk back a little, a sheepish grin on his face. "Yep, sorry, shutting up now." The sound of a door sliding open sounds like a gunshot in the quiet chamber, drawing all their attention to the now open door and the group of sentients walking through it. The people came to a stuttering halt, locking eyes with the teens. The one at the head of the pack lets out a little gasp. "Wait, you guys are kids?"